To kick off our day of learning and sharing, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Glenys MacLeod. She's the Executive Director of the Learning and Outcomes Branch with Manitoba Education. And prior to this appointment, Dr. MacLeod's educational and professional experiences in Manitoba's education system included early, middle, and senior years classroom teacher, high school special education, resource teacher, district numeracy support teacher, vice principal, and university course instructor. We're very, very lucky and fortunate to have her with the Department of Manitoba Ed. She studied expeditionary learning for inclusive education as a model for all students to explore authentic problems within their communities while developing the skills, knowledge, and spirit of learners for life. To quote from her own work, "We will need to be passionately curious, fearless in exploration, and relentless learners for life." This is a quote from chapter 4 of the book, Catch a Fire, which 15 very lucky participants will receive a free ebook copy of today. Without further ado, our keynote for today's inaugural event, I welcome onto the virtual stage and all of your screens, Dr. Glenys MacLeod.
So thank you so much, Kelly, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this session and to join in the learning this morning. For our time together, I would like to share a little bit about myself and my learning as a teacher and school leader, and now in my role with the department, and then share some of the big questions that I have about teaching and learning, the purpose of education, taking a look at where technology fits into these wonderings. One of my favorite quotes is "Les questions sont les moteurs d'apprentissage," meaning that questions are the fuel for learning. So I also look forward to your questions that may pop into the chat so that we can have a little bit of a conversation at the end of my comments this morning. I do have to admit that when first asked to speak this morning, I was pretty panicked. I would not count myself among the leaders of technology education in our province and know very well that many of you have skills in these areas that far exceed mine. However, I do have some experiences in teaching and learning with technology that I hope will be helpful to you on your journey. And so I'm thrilled to have the chance to meet with you in this forum this morning. I don't plan to get into the specifics of devices or platforms or programs, apps, hybrid or blended models that you may use in your teaching. Instead, I'd like to zero in on the why, on the purpose for teaching and learning. What is our why for engaging with technology? What is our intent? How are we defining and redefining the expected outcomes? And how will we know if we have been successful? How will we know if our use of technology has served our students well? As Kelly mentioned, I've been a teacher for about 20 years now in early, middle, and senior years settings at the divisional, provincial, and post-secondary level. I've collaborated with teachers in student services roles as a district numeracy teacher, as a vice principal and instructor at university, and now as the Executive Director of Learning and Outcomes Branch with Manitoba Education. I've been fortunate to work alongside exceptional educators every step of the way that have influenced my thinking. I enjoy the adventure and the opportunity to think with others about education, and I like to test out ideas and see just how well we can do at this schooling. My understanding is that most of you are pre-service teachers, and you have come on board at an exceptionally exciting time for education. The COVID-19 pandemic has been difficult for educators and for school communities. Teachers and students, school leaders and divisional leaders have demonstrated such passion, dedication, resilience, and hope through these challenging and uncertain times. We've been forced to evaluate a number of our practices, letting go of some and rapidly advancing others. On top of that, it continues to be a critical time for educational institutions. Although pockets of innovative practice exist and many students are finding their way to outstanding success, there continues to be elements of the current system that are outdated, exclusive, and no longer resulting in the intended outcomes. At the same time, there is such possibility for innovation, for change, for creating a system that is focused on human flourishing. There is an urgency and an appetite for continuous improvement. The sparks are there, and we have the opportunity to shift our perspective from what is to what if. It's not news that today's students will graduate into a world of incredible complexity and infinite possibility. And therefore, it is not reasonable to believe that the same pedagogical practices that have failed so many students in the past will now succeed at offering all learners the chance to thrive in today's classrooms. Just as the world is constantly changing, so must our educational practices. I can clearly shown the internet by a friend, and the first time I used my flip phone to make a call. There is no question that technology will continue to play a front and center role in our lives and in the lives of our students, and that they will experience even more change in their lifetime. When I first began my career as a teacher, I did all that I could to prepare for my students. I remember organizing my binder with lesson plans safely stored in plastic page protectors. I spent many, many summer days designing activities that I thought were very interesting. I prepared my classroom with all the features, a word wall, a snazzy hall pass, a library of great books. And then I met my students, and instantly I knew they wanted nothing to do with my perfect lessons. I loved my 821, but they were not interested. They didn't even pretend to be. They were loud, they were off task, they were often returned to my classroom by well-meaning colleagues who had described my students as disruptive. They were not at all interested in me explaining anything to them, and they didn't want me to tell them how or why things worked the way that they did. Each day I came in and I tried my best to call for their attention and follow the steps of my lesson. About 2 weeks in, I knew this wasn't going to work, and I had really made no progress. I had nothing to show for what students were learning and no evidence that my teaching had been impactful. So I needed to step back and consider what this group was really good at. They were great at arguing. They were good at making a point. They had energy. They cared for each other. They didn't leave anyone out. If they were going to get themselves into trouble, they were all going to be doing the trouble. They were sure that every one of them was completely involved in whatever it is that they were up to, and they watched out for each other in a way I've never seen a group of children watch out for each other. They were not interested in my explanations, nor did they want to be told what to do, how to think, what to follow, where to go. They wanted to figure all these things out for themselves, and they needed me to trust them, to believe in them as learners. I actually didn't want these middle schoolers to follow along, to accept the information that I gave them, to be compliant completers of what was assigned to them, and then be satisfied by being rewarded with a check mark. But I hadn't thought of it that way until they had pushed me to, and their push led me to really consider the why of our classroom and the why of my teaching. I knew I wanted my students to find themselves in just over their heads, not drowning, but stuck, that for sure. I wanted them to be able to look around and say, something isn't right here. I don't quite understand. I think we can do better. I need to find out more. And then go confidently with all the skills, knowledge, and strength that they need to find their way through to a valued solution. I wanted them to be able to look around with wonder, to ask questions, make connections, do what they know already and what they would like to find out, communicate clearly in many ways with many audiences for many purposes. I wanted them to look back on their learning, reflect, make adjustments to their process and thinking patterns so that next time they would be even more powerful in their learning. I wanted students to be innovative thinkers, to be able to analyze information from a variety of sources, creative thinkers looking for solutions that are not written in the last few pages of a textbook. I wanted them to be flexible, agile thinkers, able to adjust according to the demands of a situation. Divergent thinkers, pulling ideas from a variety of sources and experience. Collaborative, skilled communicators who are self-reliant. And as such, my teaching could not simply be a sequence of explanations and some practice. I needed to move towards a solution in which my students were learning, but not necessarily being taught traditionally by me. This started me on a search to understand how to create the conditions in which students were passionately curious, fearless in exploration, relentless in their learning, while maintaining the expectation that each student would be challenged, must be challenged, would struggle, would become stuck, and fight to become unstuck, intent on causing positive change in the world, seeing the incredible value of deepening their skills as learners, all the while holding on to a deep commitment to the others in their community. The search took me and my students away from the classroom and into our community, led by our wonderings. The first wondering that I caught was a question that students had about a new exhibit at the zoo. So dating myself considerably here, this was a long while ago, but it is a key moment that did set me up for a complete overhaul of what I believed about my role as a teacher. As students came into my classroom one day, they were excited about a newspaper article that said penguins were coming to our zoo. This was concerning because students felt that it was much too hot here for penguins. This was not the greatest question that I had ever heard, that's for sure, but it came from them. I figured that I could probably link it to some outcomes related to integers, and so we pursued it. We planned a trip, we organized our materials, we booked an interview with a zookeeper, and we headed out. Upon arrival, we went straight to the penguin enclosure, and instantly my students turned into the most motivated, committed, enthusiastic mathematicians I had ever seen. The questions about temperature was quickly replaced with richer, deeper, more complex questions. They were flying, questions with passion from students that were enraged. From there, we explored the zoo with a new lens. The question on everyone's mind became, are zoos ethical? Is it right to keep animals in enclosures just so that we can learn about them? And our challenge became backing up our opinion with accurate evidence and well-reasoned arguments. We were hooked. The more that student questions set the direction for our lessons, the closer we got to fulfilling my vision of truly learning and developing the confidence, the attitudes, the abilities, and the resilience of learners for life. Our questions led us to explore how a food bank worked and what caused food insecurity in our city, how music is made and how we could make it better, how we can increase physical access to a second floor dance studio so that all students, including those who are wheelchair users, would be able to be dancers. We explored the environmental impacts of a new subdivision, gathering data on changes in soil composition, wildlife habitats, and mapped out the location for the future fire hydrants. We identified areas along the riverbank most impacted by erosion and searched for causes and solutions. We developed proposals for new bus routes, advocated for lower speed limits and new crosswalk and a skate park in our neighborhood, and determined the best buy for popcorn at the movies. It felt like we were onto something. We were shifting from recipients of to crafters, from completers to adventurers. My challenge became watching for and then expanding on that which intrigued them, by what caused them to wonder, and then jump in with both feet into a problem to solve that they would need to define their own paths, letting all students have multiple access points, multiple options for pursuing a new concept, and therefore multiple ways for demonstrating what they had learned. It will go a little bit like this. So imagine a word problem that asks students to consider the mathematics involved in building a bridge. Perhaps it's a question on a page where there's a pre-drawn triangle connecting one side of the river to the other side of the river. It that way, let's take a walk along the river's edge. Here, my students would ask, how long does the bridge need to be? How many lanes wide would we make this bridge? How many cars, trucks, buses will we expect each day? How could we measure that? Will we make sidewalks for pedestrians as well? What about bikes, motorized wheelchairs, and scooters? Should we have a dedicated lane for them as well? How thick will the concrete of the bridge deck need to be to hold the load? How could we test that? Is concrete the best option, or can we choose a better material? Who could we ask for to find that out? How long will the support beams need to be? What other designs should we look at? How far inland from the riverbank will we build the footings to secure the bridge? How stable is the riverbank? What about erosion? Can we model that? What about snow and ice? How high above the river does the bridge deck need to be to allow boats to pass underneath? What about a flood? What records can we find to learn more about that? How can the bridge be protected from water damage? What will it mean to the communities that would connect on either side of the bridge? How could we ask the people? Will businesses benefit? Will families and friends benefit? To whom and what might the bridge bring harm? How much will this all cost, and who will pay for it? Do we really need a new bridge? Who can learn the strategies that we would need to determine the dimensions of the bridge? Who can we turn to? What tools might be helpful for measuring and designing? What formulas might we need to learn along the way? And what new wonderings would we have about this bridge tomorrow? As a result of experiences like these, we became aware of the issues in our neighborhood, creating possible solutions to challenging problems, stepping into a lead role in our learning or co-constructing role, and ultimately creating the belief that we are responsible for the world around us, understanding it and having the power to steer it towards the best possible version that we can imagine. Along the way, I came to know with certainty that shared experiences bring shared understanding, that knowledge is not a commodity, but a continuous event, that learning is best when it is flexible and content is richest when it is unbounded. A problem is an open door. Creativity and curiosity can propel us to new thinking. We are in this together. All students can learn and do learn, but that the questions from the students must lead the way. In that, the differentiation is much more authentic and organic, and that we should not accept the limitations of the four walls of our classroom. My why was simply to facilitate every possible opportunity for my students to develop rich reservoirs of imagination, an unstoppable wild curiosity, a passion to create positive change in the world through innovation and invention, an unquenchable thirst for working collaboratively with others, a fearlessness for tackling questions for which the answers are not yet known, but for which the development of new insights will contribute to causing greater understanding than our own, a commitment and the confidence to become contributing teammates, comfort when taking risks, respect for others and demonstrated through valuing time spent in supporting each other, and a desire to cultivate diversity, a welcome responsibility to be a collaborative learning partner, an eye for inclusion, the necessary skills to negotiate perspectives, boundaries, and possibilities, to be self-directed, to think independently, use information, knowledge, and technology to draw their own conclusions, to be skeptical and observant and inquisitive, to be invested in the local community and also globally literate, to be flexible in their approach to new tasks, to learn from failures and welcome uncertainty, and to be hopeful. That's a bit much all at once for one hope for my students. But focusing in, my why really became to create the conditions in which students can live and find their own whys so that they can live with agency and fulfillment. I don't want to give the impression for a moment that I have this all figured out. My two favorite things about being a teacher are the requirement to be a learner myself and a commitment to personal growth through reflective practice and active participation in learning communities. And secondly, I love that they're coming back tomorrow, which means that we can work through cycles of inquiry to continuously work at strengthening our practice. We can take a risk and try well-reasoned, evidence-based, planned inquiries. And then if they go a little bit off plan, we can adjust and try again tomorrow. As we know, the world is ever changing, and so education must remain agile as well. As Yoching has expressed, we are not preparing students for the future, we are preparing them to create a better future. What if we teach so that students can together explore authentic questions and problematic situations with opportunities to hone their ability as critical thinkers? What if schools were designed for cultivating curiosity and creativity? Can strengthening community, bringing us together in meaningful inclusion be cornerstones of our work every day? And what if our classrooms had no walls? Might that approach to education be so irresistibly engaging that we could not let it pass us by? And how might technology help us get there? Can we even imagine a problem that we could find a solution to without technology at this point? Tony Wagner and Ted Dintersmith have defined the ability to recognize a problem, define its variable, build its potential, and create a solution that will be valued by society as the new criteria for intelligence. As such, the ability to synthesize prior experiences, evaluate innovative alternatives, identify variables, reason through consequences, construct an explanation, and determine the most fitting choices are essential skills. Problem solvers are critical thinkers. That is, they examine, they question, they scrutinize, they reason, they criticize, they reflect, and they refine. When students find themselves in the middle of an ill-defined, problematic situation, they will need to select appropriate next steps, calling on known strategies and working through uncertainty and ambiguity. An ill-defined problem refers to realistic, authentic problems that are so complex, messy, that they do not lend themselves to right or wrong approaches. Consequently, students would need to self-analyze their current level of understanding, assess what information they require, and implement a strategy to support uncovering that information. The ability to invent and test new strategy when common or standard approaches have failed is an equally important skill. There are many digital resources that allow us to fully explore these types of problems, to access data sources, organize the information we have gathered, and communicate that data in multiple ways. We can connect virtually with experts in the field and the actual characters in the problem so that multiple avenues for research are pursued, bringing multiple perspectives and as much more realistic complexity to the problem. This moves research from a passive orientation to an active and interactive orientation. Can we use technology to cultivate curiosity and creativity? What choices would students make for topics, issues, problems, themes, and case studies that they would like to explore? What are the scientists studying today? What are engineers trying to build? What are the artists creating? What are the big questions in these fields of practice? And what are the gaps where novel ideas are needed? We could use digital tools as a substitute for practices that are traditionally completed with a pencil and a paper. But by substituting tech, we are changing the task slightly, but perhaps not changing the thinking or enriching the possibility. I adopt Todd Bluebert's definition of creativity as a sequence of thoughts and actions that lead to novel adaptive production, involving bringing together the ideas and thoughts into some form that can be shared, and also as a new mental combination as defined by Keith Sawyer. That leaves space for creative projects and thoughts. A student is then creative when developing a thing or a new sequence of thinking. Here, I'm sure the possibilities are endless. The tech world has no shortage of creative examples of where a moment of curiosity sparked the imagination and set the creative process in motion. Purposeful products in response to a problem or question or a burst of imagination are expressions and a means of communicating creativity. Can technology bring us together? Knowledge exists in the in-betweens. Knowing always spills past the boundaries of the knower. Digital tools that offer a space or an in-between lets us put what we know out there to have it bump up against what others know and then grow. There are avenues that students can test out theories, put a thought forward for others to respond to negotiate ideas, to hear what others have to say, and molding and remolding their thinking in result. We need spaces to get into arguments, positive, productive, heated negotiations, where we don't dismiss each other or too quickly reject each other, but where we wrestle with ideas, accepting some, challenging back on others. Can technology share the learning so that infinite numbers of learners benefit, grow, and contribute? In a learning community, we have the responsibility to contribute to the shared knowledge of the group. How might what I have learned be the boost to someone else? When we are generous with the gifts, the benefits go far. Now more than ever, it's possible to interact with the larger community, tapping into expertise in the field, mentors, storytellers, those who have wandered down this trail before, who can offer detailed descriptions and influential new ideas that bring the topics at hand to life in a relatable way. Forums for discussion and commenting, sharing feedback, asking questions are available with worldwide connections, making the vastness of the world seem a little bit smaller and bringing a global awareness to today's learners. Bringing us together doesn't end in the classroom. Tomorrow needs a commitment from today to strive to be more inclusive in our schools, so that our students become leaders of inclusion in our community. Their eyes need to be opened for moments to apply what they have learned, insisting on full participation for all. Taking advantage of opportunities to connect with those who have experiences that are not the same as our own, developing empathy and mutual respect, and connecting to resources in the community that promote equity lets us learn about the challenges of others and how our actions can contribute to the betterment of society. Can we use digital tools to support meaningful inclusion and the engagement of all learners? May it lead us closer to equity. I'll define inclusion here in two ways. First, inclusion as belonging, being an essential part of, a valued member of. As well, inclusion as opportunity and choice. Having the opportunity to take part as a fully participating member of a community requires access and careful thought given to ensuring that all are welcome, heard, valued, and celebrated. Inclusion by choice is freedom. Freedom with responsibility that the choices we make are thoughtful and appropriate and intended to build others and ourselves. We do see many examples of how tech successfully increases inclusion, extending learning in all directions, providing accessible content, personalized devices that remove barriers, and seamlessly open doors for full participation. No single learning strategy is effective for all learners all the time. Technology can fill the call of UDL by significantly increasing access when used to create multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of expression. By, for example, making language accessible, providing a common visual of the concepts, a video to stop and restart, or links to further details and background knowledge. May we use technology to take us from within the boundaries of our four-walled classrooms to a limitless view of learning, one where all places are learning spaces and each of us is teachers. Can we use these tools to mend the fractures between the subject areas, the disconnectedness and artificial separation of thinking and disciplines? The brain evolved to scan the world, not just attend to one aspect of it. Being able to interpret the surroundings of a problem and predict their impact on the situation is essential. Richard Thompson, author of The Brain, writes that action is where the rubber hits the road. His research reveals that information gathered and processing is only part of the story. Ideas must be tested against the facts of the real world. If we were to explore authentic problems with students taking on roles of engineer, scientist, journalist, architect, environmental researcher, artist, entrepreneur, then classrooms must expand to include spaces in our neighborhoods that we experience in person, as well as spaces that we can visit virtually. Many, many years ago, John Dewey wrote that a system of education based on lived experiences would create such powerful learners that they could carry their knowledge into new scenarios and use it to build further understanding. I cannot imagine that he meant the experience of sitting at a desk completing the same task as 25 other students in the room at the same time. I think he meant we needed to live it. The brain is molded by experiences, by sensory input it receives, by the problems it has solved, and by the emotions it has experienced. In my earlier example, I shared my path to using the community as my classroom, which is exceptionally valuable, but virtual experiences can also put us in the middle of a real life problem. We could design an experience in which students would recognize the need, identify the variables of a situation, hypothesize about the solution, conduct their research, and then collaborate to build a possible solution without leaving the classroom, but still being major players in the story, significantly influencing the environment in which they learn. There is no question that technology is a key ingredient to achieving these goals with students. As I had earlier mentioned, risk, the need to become comfortable with uncertainty, feeling a bit stuck, are all essential elements of the learning process for our students. And if we are asking our students to be learners, then I encourage us all to be the same. I thank you so much for the time to share this morning, and it's time together. As you start your careers, I encourage you to keep your eyes open for a class just like my 821, because students have much to teach us. Again, I wouldn't count myself among the technology leaders in the province, but I do feel strongly that it is my responsibility to be a tech learner because students need us to be. I'll end with one more question to wonder about. Can we weave technology in a way that it places in the students' hands the exhilarating power to carve their own paths, led by curiosity, rooted in purpose, connected with community, and towards the development of the strengths of a learner that will impact our world for the better? Thank you.